I said, Ron, you know, if you use stilts, you could get a whole foot out of that.
I like that very much so.
Oh, look, the camera is on. Hello, welcome to Uh-Oh Politics, a discussion of national politics. This was Kevin Tachi's idea. On today's episode, there has been a win for Democrats in states as Virginia, Kentucky, and Ohio in the off-year election. But despite that, Joe Biden's polling is getting worse. In the Republican primary, Donald Trump seems to have it clinched with the loss of the assumed nominee, Tim Scott. So we'll see how that changes the race. And a couple of other topics that we might bring up and discuss. But I'm Ian Deming. And I'm wearing a blazer now. And I'm with my co-host, Jared Valanzola, who is wearing a tie.
Also wearing a blazer.
And a blazer, a mint green blazer. Jared, how you doing?
I'm well, Ian. How are you, sir?
I'm pretty good, thank you.
Good to be back, as always, talking to the people.
Yeah, good to have you back.
Yeah,
I understand that your drive-in, you were almost struck by
Yes,
wooden
there was
boards.
a dump truck that had wooden pieces flying out of the back that I was dodging and weaving as I was making my way here, but thankfully I made it here safely. There was no impact on my vehicle. That would have obviously caused some issues, but it was an adventure. It was almost like playing Mario Kart in real life, trying to avoid hazards as I made my way here.
Got to watch out for the blue shells.
Yeah, absolutely.
The blue shells will come for you. I know you're more of a red shell kind of guy.
Yes.
All right, Jared.
The blue shell always knocked you out at first. Always
That's
went
a good
right to
point.
the first place position.
Always kind of brings everyone back to the middle. Jared, there was a New York Times poll that came out saying that Joe Biden is doing very poorly, especially in battleground states. Let's take a look at what we got here. We're looking at poll numbers in Nevada, Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And Trump is leading in 5 of those 6 states. Biden only leading by 2 points in Wisconsin, the rest leaning towards Trump. And these are all states that Biden won in 2020. So These are all essential states for him to be able to clinch if he wins re-election. But it's bad poll numbers for Joe Biden. And this is coming off of a win for Democrats with elections recently in Virginia, Ohio, Kentucky. Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear was able to win re-election. What do you think it says that Democrats seem to be performing well, but Biden does not seem to be?
Well, I think it's interesting to know with that New York Times poll, not only does it show former President Trump ahead in those key battleground states, it also shows Nikki Haley ahead of Biden, and it also shows Ron DeSantis ahead of Biden in a handful of those states as well. I think that President Biden is having a hard time articulating the realities of the situation on the ground, and that inflation, while it may be coming down, inflation went up to well over 10%. You've only brought it down by a couple of points, but it's still high. Gas prices are still high. The average American dollar is the average spend that the American has, or the average, their costs have gone up exponentially. So whether President Biden articulates it or not, the reality is the economy is hurting, people are hurting, things cost more, and people are getting less. I will say we're a year out from the general election. I haven't had a chance to read the polling mechanism within the New York Times. One of the things that I think is concerning, and Republicans need to start taking note of it, is in 2022, pollsters undercounted the 18 to 29 voting bloc. They did not take those voters into account nearly as much, and that's what showed Republicans with massive gains in Congress, or should have had massive gains. Of course, it didn't happen.
Well, you say that 18 to 29 range, but that's one of the demographics that Biden is struggling with right now.
Well, it is, and I know, and I'm not sure if it's the New York Times poll or another poll that shows Robert Kennedy Jr. is actually polling the strongest amongst that voting bloc. So whether they show up to vote or not, I think will always be the test, right? Because that is the spottiest voting bloc of any voting bloc in the country. To answer the question, though, on some of these other states, you know, Kentucky, that's an incumbent Democrat governor.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have said in 2018 when Massachusetts reelected Charlie Baker with 67% of the vote that Republicans must have been in for a good night, right? He was a popular governor in a blue state, just as Governor Beshear, who I believe his family has deep roots in Kentucky. He's fairly, not popular, but he certainly isn't underwater
Sure.
in Kentucky. So I wouldn't necessarily consider that one to be a harbinger. Ohio is interesting. That was a specific issue. But Ohio, I think, electorally has been moving more to the right as voters have left that state and moved south. And then, of course, Virginia is, purple to light blue. So
Sure.
Certainly Glenn Youngkin, the governor of Virginia now, his victory was a different harbinger several years ago. But I don't think it's much of a surprise that Democrats would have success especially in Kentucky and Virginia. You had a popular incumbent Democrat governor who I believe had run against Mitch McConnell at one point and did pretty strong against him, unless I'm thinking of somebody else. So
I don't remember.
Yeah,
Oh, let's see.
so Kentucky, Kentucky isn't much of a surprise, nor is Virginia. So I think it's going to start coming down to, look, there's a lot that can change in a year, and we're still a little under a year away now. There's a lot that can change in those poll numbers. But the last point on President Biden, I think it's no secret that his cognitive abilities are severely lacking. You watch interviews of him even 5, 6, 7 years ago. He in no way is in the same ballpark cognitively now as he was, and I think people see that, and I think it starts to resonate.
I don't know if I would agree with that, because I feel like the argument that he is kind of lost a step, that was certainly a criticism that was being levied against him in 2020 and before that. I think it's something that's kind of baked into his character. I mean, he was known as the guy who did gaffes.
Well, right, he had plenty of gaffes, but a gaffe is one thing. I think now what you're seeing is a clear cognitive performance issue with him. It's one thing to make a gaffe, it's another thing to fall upstairs, fall on stage when there was really nothing apparent. He's not cognitively as strong as he was. He's 81 years old, November 20th.
That's true. He is very old.
And that's not ageism by any stretch of the imagination, but I think voters for sure are looking at him, and I think they're looking at Trump too. Trump is no spring chicken himself.
If Biden or Trump ends up winning, they will be the oldest president.
Correct.
No, I feel like this was an issue in 2020 when Biden was running against Trump, and there was the attack on his, cognitive functions. But I mean, you compare him to someone like Dianne Feinstein, who was clearly not in a fit state.
Well, she wasn't physically. I don't know about mentally, though. I mean, physically, she obviously lost her.
Well, mentally, very clearly. I mean, there were confirmation hearings where she would say the wrong name or repeat questions. There were stories of aides saying that she would repeat the same story several times over the course of, a half hour. You're not getting stories like that about Joe Biden. That's not to say that he's not very old and says goofy things a lot, which he does, but that's kind of just what Joe Biden's been doing for, his past years in the presidency as the vice president. That's kind of who he is.
Yeah, I think if you do a compare and contrast, you would see it. And even the knock on him in 2020, the Democratic National Committee had a plan to execute in 2020, and they executed it, right? Yeah. They were able to get voters out. They were able to get their voters to show up. They voted early. They voted by mail, and they were able to secure the victory, whether it was Joe Biden or any other Democrat candidate. I think there's a difference between being a candidate and having that contrast to now he's the president of the United States, and it's been every day. And there have been issues all over the world. Obviously, Israel, Hamas, Russia, and Ukraine. Those are issues that have crept up that, frankly, under the prior administration, weren't issues. You have that plus the economy. Again, it all comes down to the economy, as Democrat strategist James Carville once said to then Governor Bill Clinton in 1992, it's the economy, stupid. And no matter how congenial he is, whether people feel like he's losing a step or not. The bottom line is they know that their life is more expensive and a little more difficult now, and he's the president of the United States. And we could argue for hours about how much effect the president has on economic conditions like gas prices. Sure. I think there's some, not all. I think there's obviously always an effect that the president has on a lot of things economically and societally. But whether it's fair or not fair, prices are higher, and there are significant more issues that exist for the average American now than they did 4 years ago, and people are looking at that and they're taking a hard look at it. But back to the original question, when it comes to the polls, it's still early. There's a lot of information that can come out and change.
And included in those polls, I would point out that Vice President Kamala Harris fares better in that same polling than Biden does, and nameless Democrat is basically the top contender.
I mean, Dean Johnson, or what's his name?
Dean Phillips.
Dean Phillips isn't running away with
Not
the
Dean
nomination?
Phillips, though, because Dean Phillips does have a name. It's specifically nameless
Unnamed
Democrat.
Democrat.
Unnamed
So
Democrat.
if we name Dean Phillips,
It's the idea of a Democrat. It's like a
it could
Schrodinger's
be
cat kind of
Could be
thing.
an
It's
Elizabeth
one-
Warren type of Democrat. It could be a Joe Biden type of Democrat, whatever that is nowadays. I'm not sure.
Right, but I mean, I think the whole thing of preferring an unnamed Democrat is because any Democrat you end up picking, there will be baggage associated with them, or votes that haven't aged well, or positions that they've taken that voters aren't on board with. So really, there's the idea of someone leading the Democratic Party who's not Joe Biden being something that is theoretically appealing to Democratic voters. And as you pointed out, that RFK Jr. Was polling very well as an independent, specifically in that younger age demographic. I think you get a lot of anxiety about another Trump presidency, about Biden's age, or even just Biden governing as a relatively centrist politician. And I think that kind of younger people are hoping for something different, but I think you also got this in 2020 where there was the Bernie wing of the Democratic Party that was insistent that they wouldn't vote for Biden, but they ended up voting for Biden. And I think
which is in contrast to the 4 years prior, because they did not vote for Hillary Clinton.
Right, which I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's strange about voting patterns in 2016 for Democrats that didn't turn out, and independents that ended up voting for Trump instead. But yeah, I think what we're seeing is that Biden is struggling with the age issue, is struggling with his governance of these wars in Israel and Ukraine, and inflation, which people are still feeling. Yeah. The question is, though, if people have an issue with the way that Joe Biden is governing, is it an issue with Democratic policies or is it an issue with Joe Biden policies? Which is why it's interesting, I think, that any Democrat fares so much better than Biden, because it seems to be. And I think with the successes that Democrats had in the off-year election in Ohio, Kentucky, Virginia, that Democratic voters are willing to vote for Democratic issues, but also find the leader of the Democratic Party to be an issue.
Well, and therein lies the rub, right? I mean, if you're the Democratic Party, you dance with the one who brought you, right? Sure. Joe Biden won an election. He's the sitting president. He gets that bully pulpit. He gets to dictate the party rules, of course, moving, I think, South Carolina to first on their schedule, not New Hampshire, not Iowa. Of course, New Hampshire's still going to vote first, I believe, anyway.
And not have any delegates
and not have
as
any
a result.
delegates, which has happened, and I think it's interesting that Democrats always talk about trying to bring more people in. Yet I know of no instances, at least in my own personal memory, of the Republican Party disenfranchising states in the primary process because they've rearranged their schedule. It happened in 2008 with Michigan and Florida. They were disallowed delegates to the Democratic National Convention because they moved their voting around. The Democratic Party didn't like that. So I do note that there's the occasional doublespeak with the Democratic National Committee on that issue. I think you're right. I think that there are certain issues that voters will vote for that are Democrat policy positions, very specific, very niche policy positions. But when it comes to President Biden, Democrats are in a very unenviable position because for years, for 8 years under Obama, I used to say Obama was one of the best presidents for Republican Party politicians. The Republican Party built a significant bench under Barack Obama. Over 30 governors, many senators, congressmen.
2010 was a
massive year,
point.
and
I mean, you're talking about from 2008, where Democrats had a supermajority, and Barack Obama as president. You had essentially kind of mirroring the first 2 years of the Trump presidency, where it's kind of smooth sailing.
You're right, and if you're looking at it from a sports analogy, we haven't really wasted that bench, right? We made a deal with Donald Trump, right? Nominate him to be president, he wins. But you haven't really wasted the bench, so you're still seeing strong, talented candidates like Nikki Haley, like Ron DeSantis, like Tim Scott, although I know he dropped out. Even some that I actually had the pleasure of meeting on a recent trip to Iowa, Governor Doug Burgum. Just real talented individuals, governors, a lot of them with track records of managerial success in the executive branch in the states that they're trying to translate nationally. And I think Democrats are in an unenviable position because what is their bench? You know, in 2020, they had to pretty much clear the deck for Joe Biden because I think he was their best option in 2020. Elizabeth Warren wasn't going to translate nationally. If she was, she would have gotten the nomination, right? Sure. Certainly the DNC doesn't want much of anything to do with Bernie Sanders. They will tolerate him, they'll humor him because, as you pointed out, he has a significant block of voters within the party. But they don't want him leading a national campaign for the Democratic Party.
Well, I mean, that for a while in the primary in 2020, Bernie Sanders was the presumed nominee until Super Tuesday.
He was.
But
what happened right before Super Tuesday? Amy Klobuchar, Senator Klobuchar dropped out. Pete Buttigieg dropped out.
And endorsed
Biden. You had a clearing of the deck for Biden because I think Biden was probably the only one who could have beaten Trump. Biden always had high favorability ratings. And one of the things I used to watch in 2020, and it sort of told the tale, Real Clear Politics, which does nothing but aggregate stories, aggregates polls. Sure. Real Clear Politics had a favorability tracker, and it was Biden's favorability compared to Hillary in 2020 compared to Hillary Clinton's in 2016. And it was something like plus 53 points, right? People liked Joe Biden more than Hillary Clinton.
Well, people really did not like Hillary Clinton.
Well, correct. And Hillary Clinton has always evoked that in people, all the way back to when she was first lady. So I think Biden was always that one that would have been able to beat Trump.
I think, though,
in 2020.
I think, though, that a lot of that support for Biden was dependent on the same anxiety that Democrats are facing now, which is we need to have someone who is electable. I mean, but the paradox of that is anyone that you elect is electable because you elected them.
That's true.
And I think someone like Bernie Sanders, who was the presumed nominee for a while, could have taken it all the way, could have won the Democratic primary, and could have gone against Trump, and maybe even would have won. But I think there was an anxiety in Democratic voters that said to themselves, well, if we nominate Bernie Sanders, then we'll lose against Trump, and the most important thing is beating Trump. And I think that kind of, to your point about Klobuchar and Buttigieg and people like that dropping out and supporting Biden.
And I actually think Elizabeth Warren stayed in to take some votes away from Bernie as well.
There's a bunch of different reasons I think that Warren stayed in, but yes, it is a point. But because when she dropped out, she didn't immediately endorse Biden,
right?
And she was a politician who was trying to run a campaign to the left of Biden and closer to the Bernie Sanders camp.
But I think when the last part, I don't want to keep beating up on Biden's cognitive abilities, but I think the last point I'll make on it is he's putting lids on days at noon, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. You can go all the way back to 1984 when people questioned Ronald Reagan's stamina.
Sure.
Which was clearly unfair compared to the stamina of President Biden, and I think that's where it starts to kind of confirm for people that he maybe doesn't have the stamina. If you're you're the president of the United States, and you're putting a lid on your day at noon, you're doing no more events, nothing else for the rest of the day. I don't harp on the vacation.
I mean, I think that's questionable, though, because he is taking these trips to Ukraine and to Israel. He is having these talks, just got back with the talk with President Xi. And, I mean, he is doing that work. I mean, there's no doubt that, you know, the gaffes that he makes in his Biden way definitely get picked up on and get play in the Fox News.
I'm not even talking about gaffes, though. I'm just talking about the schedule. I mean,
right,
yes,
but I'm saying
he's taking long trips.
His schedule is getting packed with stuff.
Well, yeah, he takes a long trip to Israel, plenty of time on a plane to rest.
Sure.
But when he's home and he's domestic, he's putting lids on a lot of his days, a lot earlier than I think prior presidents ever did before. And, you know, again, I don't harp on the vacation side of stuff. You know, every president does it. Personally, I think all presidents seem to take too many vacations. I think Trump did. I think Obama did. I think Bush did. So I won't necessarily knock Biden for that. But that said, I think that when you look at his schedule compared to President Trump's, compared to President Obama's, compared to President Bush's, at least the last three most recent presidents, you will see that yes, he's taking the long trips to Israel. He was in California talking to Xi Jinping. But, yeah, he's putting lids on his days a whole lot earlier than I think anybody expects the President of the United States to put the lid on.
Donald Trump's schedule, I mean, I don't want to get into a pattern of being like, well, but Donald Trump did this. But I mean, I think when Donald Trump was having, you know, short days at the Oval Office, I mean, there wasn't an accusation of him losing cognitive function. It was more just that he didn't really enjoy doing the job and would want to do other things, would want to visit Mar-a-Lago, would want to go golfing.
But when I say put a lid on it, I mean, I don't expect, and I know the president doesn't just report to the Oval Office 9 to 5, right?
Sure.
When I say put a lid on it, though, I mean, obviously I would consider, you know, if Biden, when I say put a lid on it, I mean he's got nothing else for the rest of the day. He's not leaving the White House to go to an event, to go to another state, to meet with a governor, to meet with Congress. When I say a lid, I mean that's it. Like, he's done. There's nothing else going on for him that day. And I agree. I think President Trump, certainly the day-to-day stuff didn't excite him as much as the political side of being president seemed to. But he was still out doing things. He was doing something. He wasn't, it's 12, we're done, we're going back to the residence, or we're going to Camp David, or back to Delaware, like it seems to be with President Biden.
I think it's a bit speculative on Biden to say that, oh, his day is done and now he's taking an old person nap.
Well, I didn't say he was taking a nap. I just said his day was done.
But I think it helps feed a narrative that I think conservatives want to have on Biden, which is that, oh, he can't do the job. He doesn't have the stamina to do the job, which is debatable. But again, I would say is the same debate that there was in 2020. I haven't noticed any difference in 2020 Joe Biden compared to 2023 Joe Biden.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'll counter with is I don't speculate. I just look at the schedule, and I use that to inform it. And I don't think he's doing nearly as much as a lot of presidents prior to.
Interesting idea. Moving down to the Republican primary that we have, though.
Yes.
Your best friend, Tim Scott, has now dropped out of the race, tragically.
Fellow real estate and insurance man.
You had mentioned before we started rolling that there was you had a Tim Scott story.
I have a theory here on why Tim Scott dropped out. So as folks who know me know, I'm a huge fan of former NFL quarterback Tom Brady. So my aforementioned trip to Iowa, I'm on the Young Republican National Committee, as folks who listen to the first episode of this podcast will know. So I had a meeting in Iowa, and we went to Iowa, and we did a mock Iowa caucus. And because I am genuinely neutral in the Republican primary, and I prefer neutrality, we decided to nominate Tom Brady. as a candidate.
Sure.
And he came in 5th.
That's not bad.
Nope, not bad at all. He came in 5th. It was Nikki Haley was the winner. Donald Trump in 2nd. Ron DeSantis in 3rd. Ryan Binkley came in 4th. I will attribute that to the open bar party that he gave to us the night before. And then coming in 5th was Tom Brady, followed by Governor Burgum, Vivek Ramaswamy, Tim Scott, and I'm blanking on who the 4th person was.
Chris Christie's dead last.
Chris Christie did not get a vote, nor did Asa Hutchinson. That was on a Saturday. That Sunday, Tim Scott had dropped out. Now, I don't know, but if I'm Tim Scott and I'm running for president, and I like Tim Scott a lot, I should very much clarify. But if I'm Tim Scott and I look, and Nikki Haley tweeted the results of this out, so like this got some traction on the interwebs. But if I'm Tim Scott and I look and I see that I finished behind Tom Brady,
Sure.
I might reconsider my candidacy for the presidency. So am I saying that in a small way I had something to do with it? I don't know. Maybe. I'm not going to take credit for it because I like Tim Scott. I think he brought an excellent perspective to the Republican primary. I think he's a wonderful man. He's just a seemingly calm and kind and gentle
And
man.
therefore has no place in the Republican Party.
Well, I think, given our current atmosphere, that's why I think he was most needed, right?
Sure.
And
Well, John Kasich posited that same theory in 2016. And,
yeah.
It didn't go too well for him either.
So
he also pulled behind Tom Brady. So
right. Look, if Tom Brady ran for president, I would absolutely.
I mean, it's
welcome
not
that.
surprising to me that Tom Brady would fare better than most American politicians.
Well,
I feel like his approval rating is higher.
It is. We had 90 people participate in the straw poll. You had Massachusetts, New Hampshire. If I really had time, he's from California. I could have gotten California in. Michigan, where he went to college. Of course, Florida, where he won a Super Bowl with the Buccaneers. So I think if we repeat this at my next meeting in Tampa in the spring, so home field advantage for TB12, I think if I repeat this performance in the spring, we'll get him a far bigger percentage. There'll be less candidates by then, too, because we'll begin voting and the field will be culled. But
So you are on record now as endorsing Tom Brady for the Republican nomination.
Yes, I will go on record as endorsing Tom Brady for whatever he wants.
Okay. Oh, all right.
President, governor, senator, whatever Tom Brady wants, I will be on record as a first endorser.
All right. Well, you've heard it here first, everyone. So Republican primary is probably cinched up, much to Tim Scott's chagrin. Also, in the House of Representatives, we had a little bit of fisticuffs going on. We have the accusation that Kevin McCarthy elbowed his fellow congressperson, Ken Buck, right? Yeah, Ken Buck. You also had the Oklahoma Senator Mark Wayne Mullen, who tried to get into a fist fight with the head of the Teamsters Union. And you have James Cormer, who was throwing a tantrum after being accused of doing the same thing that he was investigating Biden for, which is a $200,000 loan to a family member, which James Cormer was also engaged in. Hey, you think there's anything to these multiple acts of violence that are going on right now?
Well, I don't know if they're acts of violence. I think that's a stretch. I
mean, tensions are high.
Tensions
for sure.
are high. I think that.
And this is coming off of the 3 weeks without a speaker, in which
Right.
Republicans were very divided on that issue and were very much outspoken and getting into shouting matches.
I think the temperature is extremely high right now in national politics. I will say this, though. Most folks only know the name Sumner because it's a tunnel in Boston, but of course, Senator Charles Sumner was a Republican senator from Massachusetts in the 1850s and 1860s. He was a leading abolitionist, and he gave a fiery speech on the floor of the Senate. And in that speech, he made some strong statements about the South, specifically a colleague from North Carolina, I believe. Fast forward, Senator Sumner is sitting in the Senate chamber. He's doing some work, and a congressman who was related to the senator that Senator Sumner was harpooning, came in with a cane and beat Senator Sumner nearly to death. And why nobody intervened was because there was another congressman with
Holding
a
him
pistol.
at gunpoint, yeah.
Right, holding them at gunpoint. Senator Sumner never really recovered. He was reelected, however, by the Massachusetts legislature back then.
Sure.
The U.S. Senate was not directly elected. It was elected by the legislature. And he was reelected overwhelmingly and became a very early but prominent figure in the abolitionist movement. So there's been violence in the Capitol before, perpetrated by specific members. What I think is sincerely too bad, though, and it's been sort of a microcosm of social media, C-SPAN. C-SPAN was created with noble intentions. It was so the American public could view the proceedings of Congress, but it's also turned Congress into a performance politics and performance theater. And I think what we're seeing now, and it's something that I just have never had patience for, is Republicans and Democrats get very supercharged up by their base on social media.
Sure.
And they take that into the body politic that they've been elected into. And it's further exacerbated by the fact that I think people view the member of Congress especially, they view them based on their political party affiliation first, and then their position second. So to use myself as an example, I am a county commissioner who just so happens to be a Republican. But people look at me and think, no, he's a Republican who's a county commissioner. So they look at Mitch McConnell and say he's a Republican who's a U.S. senator.
Well, part of that is that there is a party line that kind of, for the most part, needs to be followed.
There is, but I think people forget that they were sent to represent, in the case of the Senate, states, in the case of the House, specific regions of the country and the state. And I think the problem now is the voting population as a whole expects that every Republican, every Democrat is going to be lockstep and beholden to whatever dogma is coming out of the party, and dismisses the fact that...
I don't think that that's necessarily true, though, because I think that it is dependent on the party line, which most people do follow. But I think, to your point on this exacerbation through social media, it's revving up the people, their own constituents, right? So, for example,
right, but that's the view that they have of Congress. So, to finish the point is that's the view that they have, is that they are Republicans or Democrats, and they represent Republicans and Democrats. They don't take into account that no, they also represent the other party. They represent people in no party, and then yes, as you just so correctly stated. Then they get jazzed up by the base via social media. And frankly, via the national media, Fox, CNN, MSNBC, Newsmax, OAN. I consider them, and I've said this often, I consider them to be like fast food restaurants, right? Fox News is Chick-fil-A, MSNBC is McDonald's, CNN is Taco Bell. You're going to get different things.
MSNBC would definitely be Wendy's, I think.
No, I like Wendy's. And I like McDonald's, so I probably shouldn't have made that. They could be Arby's. MSNBC could be Arby's. Who goes to Arby's?
But they have the meats.
They do have the meats. Where is there an Arby's, though?
I don't know.
Right, we're in Massachusetts. I don't know where there's an Arby's. Anyway, I think that's the problem. So I think now what you're going to start seeing is, people always say, well, you need to speak out. You need to swing back. I mean, you have Maxine Waters at one point saying several years ago, if you see Republicans out to dinner, you need to go up to them and get in their face. And, well, why? Why? The temperature and the volume needs to be turned down a little bit. I don't hold out any hope that it will be. And I think it's perpetrated by many actors on both sides. I don't think there's a singular individual that can claim the mantle of it. Certainly President Trump in the Republican side. There are plenty of others on the Democrat side who are just as equal in fanning the flames of confrontational politics.
But you're not seeing that, especially with these specific incidents that took place over the past week. These were all essentially Republicans who were displaying this behavior.
Yeah, it was Republican electeds this week. I'm sure we could find plenty of examples of Democrats electeds doing it the same. Again, I give you the example of Charles Sumner 100 and something years ago, right? So, there's never been...
Well, I would point out, actually, that the Oklahoma Senator Markwayne Mullin actually brought up in an interview when basically asked to explain why he was willing to get into a fist fight with the head of the Teamsters
and I think
Union.
that's too bad. I don't think that's necessary. I don't think that solves anything.
It doesn't, but I would point out that he, in an interview where he was asked to explain himself, he actually tried to justify his use of violence, referring to the caning of Sumner as past precedent and actually as a reason why it should happen more. I mean, that's essentially an endorsement of the caning of Charles Sumner, which, one, is not really past precedent when it's happening over 100 years ago, and two, this is an abolitionist who is beaten by a pro-slavery delegate.
Right, a pro-slavery Democrat congressman from, I think it was South Carolina.
Well, you chose the term Democrat there on purpose.
He was a Democrat.
Yes, and the Democratic Party is completely different than the Democratic Party of the 1800s, just as the Republican Party is.
True, but history is history. The Patriots are a different team now without Tom Brady, but that doesn't mean that they didn't have him and didn't win Super Bowls with him.
But the Republican Party is no longer the party of a strong centralized government, which it was.
I think that you could debate the historical intentions. The Republican Party was, however, founded by former Whig Party members who were anti-slavery. It was founded as an anti-slavery party. So the Republican Party can root its founding in 1854 to anti-slavery former Whig Party members. So it is fair to say that the Republican Party then is now and forever will be the anti-slavery party. There's no need to ever think otherwise about the Republican Party. So, certainly Abraham Lincoln took some steps during the Civil War that whether those would be taken today, if there was another Civil War again, who knows? The Civil War obviously established that once you ratify the Constitution and you're in the Constitution, you don't leave. So now South Carolina and the southern states, you're not allowed to leave. You're with it, you're in this, and you're not allowed to leave the federal government and form a new confederacy or form a new nation. So
now you say that, but the Confederate flag is a big symbol of the Republican Party.
Oh, it's not a symbol of the Republican Party.
No?
No.
It's something that's used consistently.
I think there are
Republican rallies.
I think there are individuals who certainly bring those.
Individuals who exist within the Republican Party.
I don't think they're registered in the party. They certainly bring them to specific events. But the Stars and Bars flag, of course, then was created by the Democrat Party. Of course, the Confederate flag itself
the Democratic Party, yeah.
The Confederate flag itself
great.
Was not
That's awesome.
The national flag of the Confederate States of America either, which is sort of ironic. I don't like the Confederate flag. They lost the war. You lost the war. You don't get to keep symbols from a failed excursion. The Confederate States was its own separate nation for the time we were fighting the Civil War. They had their own presidency.
Actively trying to destroy the American Union.
Right. They had their own presidency. They had their own Congress. Jefferson Davis, of course, was their president. And they had their own symbols. They lost the war. So I never consider the Confederate flag. And look, I give Nikki Haley a lot of credit. When she was governor of South Carolina, she removed the Confederate flag from state grounds.
Which was unpopular among her constituents.
Well, I think she walked away with a still pretty high approval rating nonetheless. So I think that it's obviously an interesting part of our history, but nevertheless, I forget how we ended up on this tangent talking about the Civil War and symbols of the Civil War.
The caning of Sumner, which again goes back to the Oklahoma Senator Markwayne Mullin talking about that as basically a reason that there should be more aggressive
well,
behaviors.
And I will say I don't agree
if we're
with
talking
him.
about
I don't
kind
agree
of,
with the senator from Oklahoma. in that
right, but
respect.
if we're talking about fanning the flames of divisiveness, I think it goes without saying that politics is something that makes people feel uneasy because it's so divisive. And if we're talking about divisive language, I feel like these incidents, coupled with the most recent Trump speech in which he referred to leftist vermin, I think you're getting this heightened rhetoric mixed with actual potential for physical violence that is incredibly unsavory. I mean, the quote from Donald Trump was, "We pledge to you that we will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country." I mean, I think that language, coupled with these multiple incidents of violence breaking out, is perhaps a bad omen.
Well, I don't know if it's an omen. I mean, again, Hillary Clinton called Trump supporters a bag of deplorables.
Yes.
I think, again, the temperature and the volume is high on both sides. Certainly, President Biden made a speech last year condemning MAGA Republicans. I think
and condemning them specifically because of their use of threats of violence.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of chatter and conversations that happen in both parties, on both sides, on what I consider to be the very far edges of the right and the left, and I think that's unfortunate.
Now you're saying both sides, but again, all of these are currently issues that are existing within the Republican Party.
I think there were left-wing activists, I forget the specific issue, that stormed one of the House office buildings recently.
Well, if we're talking about storming the House,
they were in the Capitol.
Insurrection on January 6th.
But the point is, both sides have and are guilty of continuing to inflame the violence and rhetoric.
But if you want to make the argument that both sides have responsibility towards this fanning of the flames, we have to make sure that the accountability makes sense for how much each party is contributing. Because I think the idea of saying both sides contribute to this problem is kind of letting Republicans.
Well, I'm not letting Republicans off the hook.
I don't think that it's equal, though.
I would argue,
think
though,
especially with all these.
I don't think a lot of these folks are genuine Republicans either. I don't think that they are a part of the party. I don't think that they operate within the party. I think they operate outside of it because they don't trust the party. They don't trust the institutions that have been established in this country, and I think that in where it lies is both sides and both leaders of the parties have a responsibility to turn down the volume and turn down the temperature. I will disagree with the characterization that it's only operators on the right. There are certainly
I
plenty
didn't
of
say
operators on the right.
only operators on the right, but it is disproportionately.
I'm not so sure
Republican
it's
issue.
disproportionately. I think it's a matter of if somebody storms the Capitol, which is not an example I wanted to use, if it's an issue you agree, so I believe that's wrong no matter what. That is always going to be wrong.
Sure.
The only other time the Capitol was stormed was 1812 when the British burned it. So I believe that's wrong no matter who, when, where, why, and how it's being done. But I think that there's the inherent bias where it's okay when it was for Donald Trump if you're a Republican or a Trump supporter, but it wasn't okay, and it isn't okay. It wasn't okay then, in my opinion, and it wasn't okay, and it isn't okay when, say, it's maybe left-wing activists talking about a climate issue or whatever, or a Supreme Court matter that they're trying to obstruct. So it happens on both sides. I think that there's...
But I guess the issue that I'm getting at is that you're bringing it back to the both sides each time. But I'm referring to a very specific quote that was given recently by Donald Trump, who has given these kinds of quotes before and has kind of upped the ante each time.
Yeah, but Democrats have given plenty of them as well.
But you're just saying the exact same thing, which is that...
But
the whataboutism, I think...
Well, it's not whataboutism. I don't operate in whataboutism at all. I'm pointing out that I believe both sides have a responsibility to turn the volume down and figure out how to govern and coexist.
Both sides have a responsibility to turn the volume down. And are Republicans doing anything to turn down the volume right now?
Well, I think there are Republicans running against Donald Trump, who I think...
Not successfully.
Sure, but you never know. We haven't voted yet, and once
not only
voting
not
begins,
successfully, but also not actively against him.
Well, you
most
say-
of the people who are running against him are still supportive.
They've been taking it to him, and you say not successfully. Look, we haven't. The Republican primaries have not started yet, and we're still 57 days away from the taping of this podcast to when Iowa begins voting. So you never know what could happen.
That's true,
in
but
that
currently
time
polling
frame.
shows Trump ahead by
Yeah.
nearly 60 points. I mean, you're talking about people like DeSantis struggling to even keep
Yeah, it
double
looks like
digits.
Nikki Haley is the one that's going to potentially surge and position herself to be the Trump alternative.
The Trump alternative, which again, it is still Trump's party. And Trump being the leader of this party, and also being someone who has a big influence on how other people in the party operate.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
And I think that that's the presidency of Donald Trump and Donald Trump's influence on the Republican Party is a big reason why we have the divisive politics that exist right now. Is evidenced by his, rooting out of the vermin.
Yeah, I mean, it's an unfortunate choice of words, just like basket of deplorables, unfortunately.
Again, yeah,
candidates-
that is a whataboutism.
Well,
but
you're doing the whataboutism on your side of it, though. I mean, you're taking one quote by Donald Trump and using it. So I think that throughout
Right,
our
but,
history,
I mean, the-
Republican and Democrat candidates have both been guilty of it. It's an equal opportunity.
No, it's not. It's not equal opportunity, my friend.
It's very equal opportunity.
I-
it has been, and it always will be. It's just you don't mind it when a Democrat says it about
No,
Republicans. because
but
inherently
that's
you agree
actually
with
the
it.
bigger problem, actually, because I feel like Democrats do hold their own accountable, and Republicans do not.
I'm not so sure about that.
Well, that might be a conversation for a different time, but I mean, I think if you look at the way people have continued to stand by Trump, even through everything, through thick and thin, I think you wouldn't see that on the Democratic side. You would see a condemnation of someone running on that kind of rhetoric and that kind of language.
So again, not doing whataboutism, but we have an example, and there wasn't a condemnation of that. So we can dissect it further, but there was an example of that. It was Hillary Clinton, and there wasn't a widespread condemnation of it.
Right. There was the basket of deplorables, which, as we all know, led to an insurrection and many death threats to Republican lawmakers. All right, well, that's all the time we have today for this project that, again, was Kevin Tachi's idea. I cannot emphasize that enough. Jared, thanks so much for being with me.
And always a pleasure. Can't wait for the next one.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. Hopefully we'll have a lot to talk about. We won't have Tim Scott to talk about, which will be unfortunate. But with any luck, we'll get Dean Phillips on the show.
Yes.
I know he's struggling for airtime right now. Dean, Representative Phillips, come on down. We'd be happy to have you as a guest. But thanks so much for tuning in to Uh-Oh Politics, and we'll see you in the next episode.